Part 1. The Sleeping City. Bhopal, a peaceful city in the heart of India. The night of the 2nd of December 1984 was light, dark, and the air was filled with the distinctive red dust smell of central Vietnam. Rows of old tiled roof houses were crowded around the Union Carbide industrial estate, the largest pesticide factory in Asia at the time, which was believed to help crops grow better. From above, the yellow lights of the factory illuminated the surrounding residential area, casting a shadow over moldy walls, narrow alleys filled with small shops, and folding beds where workers slept on the sidewalks. Many poor people lived just a few hundred meters from the factory fence. They were used to the smell of chemicals, to the white smoke whenever the wind changed direction. The smell had become part of the Bhopal night, unpleasant but familiar, like the sound of car horns and dogs barking in the distance. That night, the city slept in a fragile peace, a stillness hovering on the edge of disaster. Inside the engineering department, the night shift began. Cold white neon lights illuminated rows of giant steel tanks, each taller than a two-story building, containing dozens of tons of methyl isocyanate, MIC, a highly toxic and volatile chemical that reacts violently with water and can kill in minutes if inhaled. In the control room, the night shift workers sat around the old control panel, the dials still showing normal numbers. They knew exactly how dangerous what they were working with was. But after hundreds of trouble-free shifts, they had grown accustomed to the feeling that everything was fine. Some safety systems were shut off to save electricity, some control valves had not been serviced on schedule, and Tank 610 was exceeding safe pressure limits, but no one noticed. The night supervisor, tired, sipped cold tea, wrote a few lines in his notebook. Pressure stable, no abnormalities. Outside, the city was still asleep. Children curled up on thin mats, street vendors lay with their heads on carts, guards slumped in small booths. The night wind blew through the corrugated iron roof, carrying with it the smell of metal and moisture. No one knew that right under their feet, underground in the factory, a chain of chemical reactions was quietly starting. A small amount of water, just a few cups, leaked into the MIC pipeline, and there, toxic gas began to be produced. The temperature gradually increased. On the clock in the control room, the pressure needle moved slightly, almost imperceptibly. A worker stood up to check, then sat back down, thinking it was just a small fluctuation. Outside, the Bhopal night was still peaceful, but in the darkness, the chemical bomb was slowly waking up, not with an explosion, but with a breath. Part 2 start time, 11:30 p.m. The night was still quiet in the Union Carbide factory. The machines hummed steadily, as usual, except for the fans and the tapping of pencils on control panels. Then a faint sound rang out, a low hiss in the chemical pipeline. Somewhere in the system, water had leaked into tank 610, which held nearly 40 tons of methyl isocyanate. A chain reaction began immediately. The water met the MIC, creating heat, vaporizing the gas, and the pressure inside skyrocketed. Within minutes, the temperature climbed from 20 degrees Celsius to 100, then 200 degrees Celsius. Alarm sensors began to sound, red lights flashing on the control panels. But the alarm did not cause anyone to rush. A worker stood up, glanced at his watch, and shrugged. It must have been a false alarm. The system had given false alarms many times, and there were only a few people on duty this night. They didn't know that in that thick steel tank, a volcano was forming. When the workers arrived at the inspection area, they saw white steam starting to spew out from the valve mouth. The pungent smell, like chili, like paint, spread throughout the corridor. They reported to their superiors, But shutting down the entire system required approval from the supervisor, and the supervisor was at the other end of the factory building. Everything happened too quickly. 0:15, the safety valve blew open. There was a dry whoosh sound, then silence, and then a long hissing sound. A dense white stream of steam sprayed out, swirling into low clouds. It rose and quickly spread out over the fence, blown by the northeast wind straight into the densely populated residential area. In the dim moonlight, the white steam looked like fog. Many residents stood in front of their doors and said, "The fog has come down so early." Then the pungent smell came. People began to cough. Throats burned, eyes stung, breathing became shallow. Children woke up, screaming. Some ran into the streets, thinking that if they just got out of their houses, they would be safe. But MIC gas was heavier than air. It crawled along the ground, seeped into every alley, crept through the cracks of doors, covered beds, blankets, and sleeping faces. Dogs barked madly, then fell silent. Birds fell from their branches. The night watchman at the nearby market collapsed on his table, not knowing why. In the darkness, coughing, screaming, and running footsteps mixed together, spreading out like a shapeless nightmare. And on the roof of the Union Carbide plant, the white gas continued to pour out. No explosion, no flame, only death blowing in the wind. Part 3, Night of Gas. 1 a.m. The entire city of Bhopal had become a fireless hell. The narrow streets and slums surrounding the Union Carbide plant were now filled with a white haze. People jumped out of bed, coughing, their eyes burning so much they couldn't open them. They didn't know what was wrong with them. They had only one instinct: run. Run away from that smell, from that breath. Those still in their homes collapsed in front of their doors, their chests convulsing, their hands clutching their throats. On the streets, hundreds of people collapsed, still clutching their children or covering their noses in despair. Whole families of 3 or 4 fell together in the same night. Many fainted as soon as they opened their doors, because the poisonous gas was heavier than air, spreading close to the ground like a blanket of death over the entire city. At Hamidia and Gandhi hospitals, ambulance sirens wailed throughout the night, but no one had time to understand what was happening. The first doctors were stunned to see patients, dozens of them, brought in at a time, their eyes red, their skin blistered, their breathing labored. One doctor said, "They came in with burning eyes, their lungs foaming, and we didn't know what was wrong with them. There were no drugs, no masks, no oxygen. We just watched them die." A nurse recalled, "We gave one person an injection, turned to help another. When we came back, they were dead. It was so fast, it was unbelievable." The air was thick with the smell of chemicals, sharp as needles piercing the lungs. The wind carried the poison deeper into the city center, sweeping through markets, bus stations, and slums. The streets were strewn with corpses. Cars were abandoned, their doors wide open. Livestock, dogs, cats, birds lay scattered. Not a whistle, no evacuation order, just coughing, crying, people falling in the darkness. A reporter later wrote, "The whole city felt as if a bomb had been dropped, except there was no explosion. Death came through the breath, through the air they breathed." 2 a.m. The cloud of toxic gas spread over 8 kilometers. More than 40 tons of methyl isocyanate had escaped, turning Bhopal into a silent death zone. The neighborhoods around the plant Chola, Jayaprakash Nagar, and most of the Hadaf camp were silent. Only the wind and the rattling of metal, iron doors rattling in the poisonous wind. That night, there were no sirens, no emergency lights, no warning. Only the breath became the killer, and the whole city sank into a nightmare from which it could not wake. Part 4, Dawn over the Dead City. When the sun rose, Bhopal was no longer Bhopal. The first light of day brought no life, but only a clearer view of a dead city. No birds, no children, no cars. Only the wind blowing through the ash-filled streets and an eerie silence. Survivors staggered out of their homes, trembling steps, temporarily blinded, their throats burning. They coughed constantly, vomited white foam, their skin blistered. Many still did not understand what had happened in the night. They looked around and saw bodies lying everywhere, on the streets, in alleys, on porches, in front of pagodas, around the slums near the Union Carbide factory. Whole families died in each other's arms. Bicycles fell over beside the bodies. A mother lay on her side, holding her baby. The baby still thought she was sleeping. Hospitals became a second hell. Doctors and nurses worked desperately. No protective gear, no masks, no antidotes. No one had ever been trained to handle a chemical disaster of this magnitude. They tried to wash the eyes with cold water, wipe the skin with milk, and bandage the blisters with wet gauze. But it was no use. The bodies of the poisoned convulsed, their lungs filled with fluid, and their hearts stopped beating within hours. In the first 24 hours, more than 3,800 people died. In the days that followed, another 15,000 died slowly, painfully, and suffocatingly. Eyes were blinded, lungs burned, nerves permanently damaged. Tens of thousands of survivors suffered from lung burns, chronic poisoning, and their children were born with deformities that would last for generations. Meanwhile, Union Carbide did not immediately send a team of experts. Company executives were silent. Local authorities were in disarray, with no evacuation plan, no instructions for handling the poison gas. News was withheld for hours. Only people saved each other. Young men dug mass graves. Trucks carrying corpses drove around the clock. No coffins, no ceremonies, just smoke and the smell of formalin in the wind. A man, his face covered in ash, told the reporter, "I can't cry anymore. I buried my whole family. My wife, 2 children, my mother, everything." By noon, the Bhopal sun hung in a dull sky, its light no longer warm. Under it, a city of more than 500,000 people had turned into an open graveyard, where breath, tears, and silence all smelled of chemicals. Part 5. The Truth Hiding. In the days after the disaster, as the toxic smoke cleared and the smell of chemicals lingered in the air, the search for answers began. Investigative teams entered the Union Carbide plant, which, just a week before, had been a symbol of modern industry. Now, it was a steel graveyard of charred tanks, rusted pipes, and heat-welded valves. Reports gradually revealed a stark truth. The safety systems had long been disabled. The scrubber tower, which neutralized the toxic gas before it was released, had stopped working. The emergency flare tower was broken and unrepaired. The safety valve had not been properly maintained. Tank number 610 was filled beyond its capacity, and the workers were ill-trained and lacked even basic protective equipment. It all added up to a chain of fatal errors, not accidental, but the result of years of cost-cutting. Internal warnings were sent, but ignored. Company records read, "Low risk, high repair costs." The Indian government quickly arrested Warren Anderson, the head of Union Carbide's India branch. But he was released on bail within days and left India on a private plane. He then returned to the United States, never to be extradited. The parent company in the United States said, "This was an operational error by the local branch. Union Carbide is not liable." The victims sued, but the international justice system dragged on for nearly a decade. In the end, They received only $470 million in compensation, less than $500 for each life lost. That's not enough to buy medicine for the survivors. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of people still live in the contaminated soil. The groundwater around the plant still contains chemicals, causing generations of children to be born with deformities, curved spines, weak lungs, and blurred vision. Women have had miscarriages, babies have been born prematurely, and skin ulcers have developed from contact with contaminated soil and water. Union Carbide left, leaving behind a ruined plant, leaking chemical tanks, and a neglected community. No thorough cleanup plan has been implemented. Every time it rains, people smell the familiar, pungent odor from the ground, like a wound that has never healed. An American journalist once wrote, in a report published in the New York Times, Bhopal did not die overnight. It is dying day by day, breath by breath. And to this day, as night falls over the city, yellow lights still shine dimly through the abandoned factory. On the wall, the old writing remains. Union Carbide for a better life. But for Bhopal, that life stopped on the night of the 2nd of December 1984. Part 6. The Legacy of Gas. 40 years have passed, but for the people of Bhopal, the night of the 2nd of December 1984 has never ended. They still call it by a simple, eerie name, the Night of Gas. On the outskirts of the city, amid the overgrown grass and cracked walls of the abandoned Union Carbide plant, there is an old, rust-stained brick wall. On it, someone wrote in white paint, in a scrawl that was haunting, Bhopal, 1984, never again. Every year, on this day, the survivors, now with gray hair, still dim eyes, still weak lungs, gather there. They carry portraits of their loved ones, light small candles at the foot of the wall. No one says much, no crying, only the night wind blew, carrying the smell of damp earth and the memory of a night that time could not erase. Bhopal was not just an industrial accident, but a confession of the century, a symbol of human arrogance and indifference to life. A factory built to feed the crops, to kill insects, to protect the seeds, ended up killing the very people who sowed them. Tens of thousands died, but their death was not just in numbers. It was in the children born afterward with opaque eyes, in the mother's lifelong coughs, in the neighborhoods that still did not dare dig wells because the groundwater was still poisonous. An Indian poet once wrote, "That night the sky did not cry. It just watched silently as people poisoned themselves." And in Bhopal, that silence has never broken. One night, one broken valve, and a city that never woke. Today, when we talk about Bhopal, we are not just talking about the past. We are talking about a warning that disaster does not need bombs or war. Sometimes it just takes a wrong decision, an ignored alarm, someone thinking, "I'll deal with it tomorrow." And from this, the world has learned. There is nothing more dangerous than the indifference of people who believe they are in control.